think everybody had been to Queen last night in Dunedin.
Yeah, did they say that the amount of people was a third of the kind of controls being
Right, 10:31. I'll go ahead and get started. Let me record. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the umpteenth eTraining session that we've done.
First one of 2020.
Yes, the first of 2020. That's a better way to phrase it. We will be going through an example of a slide redesign. So I have an example from Squash New Zealand, who've kindly donated this to us for this purpose. So I will be authoring on their site, and we'll just go through what it looks like and kind of show you what I would do to it if I was given it as a content designer, effectively. So feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions, but this is just kind of an example of how to approach redesigning something when you just have content and you're trying to make it fit within what we've got to work with. Righto. So let me know when you guys can see my screen. Everyone good in the internet?
Yep, all good.
Awesome. Okay, so this was the slide that they had to work with originally. So this is a really common problem that I get from a lot of different clients, and this is why I thought it was a good example to use for eTraining. So what we have is just a wall of text ultimately, and the goal is to make it more engaging and add some color and add some life to it. So the first thing that I will always do with something like this is I read it and understand it, because you can't give any credit to it if you don't understand what is being said. So I read through this before before we started the session, and effectively what I found is that there's one bit here where you could probably cull some text and get rid of something. Why are they important? They mentioned two different age ranges that are actually saying the same thing. So you could theoretically get rid of the second sentence or find a way to combine them. So I'm not going to go through the gist of writing and content editing. We'll say for the purpose of example that this second sentence is a moot point, so we don't need it. That process is really important when you're trying to put something online. So understanding what it is you're going to be trying to teach someone, but then also what can I get rid of? What is duplicated information? What is muddying the waters? Get rid of any words that don't actually add anything to it. I find a lot of people who come from an academic background tend to write things with a lot of adjectives and everything is very descriptive, and sometimes that's not the best approach to take when you're trying to teach people how to do something from an online perspective, especially if it's something you want to use on a phone. Less is always more when you're working on a phone. So nonetheless, we've gone through our content, we've gotten rid of all the extraneous pieces that we don't need, and from here what I will do is say, okay, how do I break this up and make it so that it stands out? Conveniently, whoever wrote this gave subheadings that will very nicely split this into 4 different slides. So that would be the immediate approach I would choose to take with it, is actually create 4 different slides for each of those subheadings. So for starters, we'll grab this first one, and I default to keyboard shortcuts. So if you are using a Windows, you will go with Control-C. If you're using a Mac, it's Control-C, or Command-C. So we'll copy that, and then we will add a new page. And this part is important, and I'll explain a little bit further as to why, but when you're pasting anything into Bracken, you want to use Control or Command, and then Shift-V, and what that does is bring through the text itself in its raw format without any of the formatting that's been brought through when it was copied the first time. Now, if you've had training sessions with me, you'll have heard this previously, but as an example, this text would have been copied and pasted directly, so there's a lot of formatting sitting behind it that's going to make it a different font, a different color, and if you are copying and pasting things from different documents, you can end up with a module that looks very disjointed and not very matchy. So my general rule of thumb, anytime I'm pasting anything, is to just do Control or Command and then Shift-V, and that pastes it without the formatting. So you have stuff that fits whatever your brand requirements are for that particular site, and it gives you something that's easier to edit moving forwards. Any questions?
I often would duplicate that slide 4 times and delete.
Yeah.
Format as well.
And that
Keep
works
the
too.
format.
Yeah, so if you want to keep the formatting, then by all means that's a good approach.
Yeah.
The problem that I run into occasionally is that when you have formatting like this, that formatting is tied to that cell. These particular quick pick themes, for example, so if I'm going to set a theme for something, that's actually controlled in the back of the site. So if your company goes through a rebrand, all we have to do is whip into the back of the site, change that, and it changes it for everything else. But if you've left the formatting in place, that's a manual process to go through and update those. So my general rule of thumb is to paste it without, but if for some reason you need to keep it, then that's definitely something that you can do. So we've got the gist of the text that we want. From here, I'll grab the header. So we'll actually cut that. So instead of copying, I'm going to go Command X, and we'll get rid of these full returns. And then we'll do Command V to paste. And we'll put that roughly where we want our header to go, and put our body text roughly where we want the body text to go. Now for the header, you'll want to go to Text, Theme, and then pick whatever option you have on your site that is the header option that you want to use. If you are working on a site and you do not have customized options here and you would like them, get in touch with your Bracken representative and let us know what your branding requirements are, and we can make sure that they're set up appropriately so that you can grab them really quickly. So you've set your header formatting up, and the other thing you want to do is set this up so that it's the title for that slide. To do that, you'll go to Cell Style with that cell selected and click Cell as Slide Title. And you'll see down here that what that does is indicate that this cell is to be the title of this particular slide. So that's important in 2 different areas. Firstly, the navigation panel, and secondly, if you are using summary pages. If you don't have a cell indicated as the slide title, then nothing actually shows up down here to give you an indication of what it is. Same with the summary page for your users that are going through and looking at what they've answered. They'll have no indication of what slide that question actually is on. So I always recommend that you use that when you can. My next steps here are going to be to open this up so that I've got some space covered. And then often what I'll do on top of that is I'll identify what part of this sentence is the standout part that people really need to understand. And for me, it is this first bit: fundamental skills are gross motor movements involving different parts of the feet, blah, 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 blah. So you highlight all of that, make it bold, and now you've got a really nice kind of short, snappy, here's what it is, this is what we're talking about. Now, how do I make this a little bit more engaging with some image or some video? My first port of call with information like this is to try and find a video. Mainly because what's mentioned in the content is actually covering a very, very wide array of different types of things that you can photograph. So you've got different body parts, you have different sports listed, and none of those are going to be a really clear indicator of what that sentence is actually saying. And that goes back to really understanding what you're trying to get across. Any image that you add on should add to whatever is on the page content-wise. If it doesn't, then it's just decorative and it doesn't really matter what it is at that point. So you don't want to confuse your learner and make them think that this is all about gymnastics, for example. So what I've done there is said, oh, well, I'm sure there will be someone who's done a video of whatever this is and some examples of that kind of movement. So I just did a really quick Google and found this site for Australia. They have got a nice video here that's hosted on Vimeo that goes through Kids at Play, a summary of teaching fundamental movement skills. And that feels close enough to what we're talking about that I'm happy to use it. Anything that's on Vimeo or YouTube, you can just use the URL directly and you can embed that directly on the slide. And this is also a good opportunity when you're kind of finding this supplemental stuff. You can earmark this as something that you could recreate later on when you have the funding or the time within your own organization and make it something that's geared specifically to your users. In the short term though, I find a lot of organizations in Australia and Britain have similar kind of concepts to what happens in New Zealand. It's very hard to find New Zealand specific content for certain things. So I tend to kind of lean on, you know, the UK or Australia if I'm a bit stuck. So for this one, we're going to grab this Vimeo link. To do that, you just kind of look at the player, and you'll see that when I hover over Vimeo, that turns it into an active link. And when I select that, it'll pop up the video in its actual spot. And what I want to do is grab just the URL. So we'll copy that. We'll come back to our module, and we'll go to Add, and then we'll go to Media, and then YouTube, which is effectively just a URL that you can input. So you'll see here I've got a cell that I can paste that URL directly into, and then I can pop this down here and preview it, and you'll see that now that video is inset directly on the slide. Now the other thing you can do with this is squish this around so that it fits nicely wherever you want it to go. So if I want that front and center, I can kind of set it there, and I might open this up just a little bit to get rid of the word that dropped down on the next line. So now we have something that looks nice and balanced. So we'll preview it again. Everything's set in place. You have your what are they, your key statement is standing out, and then you have a video to back everything up. And Daniel, you can have this when I'm done with it, by the way, if you want it. I don't know if you want that video, but you're more than welcome to it. All right, so next on the list, we have why are they important? So we'll do the same again. We'll do our command copy. We'll come over here. We'll go to page, make a new one. And then we'll command Shift V, grab our header, and cut that out with command X. Get rid of the full returns. Command V to paste that header back in a new cell. And then we'll move that up and do the same again where we make the heading and we make it as a slide title. Like such. So this is a bigger piece of text than what we had on the previous slide. And what I like to do with these is actually just make way more paragraphs than what would probably be acceptable for an English teacher to make. It makes it easier to read and easier to pick apart. So for this one, we have 2 sentences, 3 sentences here, and I'll have a quick look through it and say where is a good spot to kind of break this up. So we've got 4 sentences, this in turn. I would say here would be pretty logical, because the first bit you're talking about, here's what it is, this substance with myelin, la la la, and then you go into the unfortunately, this is what you need to be aware of. So for this particular piece of statement, I think the most important thing would be this last bit. So it's critical that we develop these skills before the ages of 11 to 12. So same here. We'll highlight the bit we want to bold, and you can use keyboard shortcuts here as well. So if you want to make something bold, you can just go to Command or Control, and then B, and that will bold that particular statement. So same again, what I have here, this is something that we call an orphan, this word that's hanging out on this next line. And that sometimes just, it's very nitpicky and very, annoying, but I'll open that up so that I have nice clean lines to work with. And from here I think, okay, now how do I want to illustrate this? So the statement that I've got to use is talking about 11 to 12-year-olds and that it's critical for those skills. You're also talking about some scientific concepts around myelin and how the brain is kind of developing in this age range. For me, the thing I want to illustrate is that you're looking at the 11 to 12 year age range. So I don't really think a video would be necessary for this, because when you're teaching someone about fundamental skills, they don't actually need to know that much about myelin and what it does, I'm assuming. They just need to know that it's this age bracket that's actually important. So again, looking at the content, what's the thing that's important for your users? If this was a chemistry unit of some sort or a biology unit, I would be leaning more on the myelin side of things and thinking about kind of how can I illustrate that from a scientific standpoint. But these people are going to be coaches, so they just need to understand this age range is when you need to have this kind of nailed in regards to your skill set. So for that reason, I will go and find a photo that I can put in the background that will illustrate that point a little bit for me. What I've done here is gone to Unsplash, and you guys may have heard me talk about this before. This is a really nice photo site that's that's available for anyone to use. It's totally free. You have a really good selection of images that you can get really high quality shots from, and they're all cleared for public use, commercial, whatever. The key is that you consider giving credit to the author. You don't have to, but it is always a nice nod to do that. So I will often point clients in this direction first because these images are freely available to use. If you find that you don't have exactly what you want, which it can be hard to kind of source New Zealand specific images on sites like this, you can always come to us and let us know what you're looking for, and we can have a look on the graphic site that we have a subscription to for something that might work a little bit better. For this slide, we're looking for 10 to 12-year-olds, and I'm looking for someone playing, doing something exciting. So I've gone with kids playing in grass. That's pretty straightforward. And what you'll see are a bunch of different images. So what I look for when I'm cruising through an image site is something that is landscape, because the box that I have to fill is landscape. Portrait is very difficult to work with unless you're going to kind of set it over here off to the side, which you could. There's nothing wrong with that. But in my mind, I want the whole thing filled. I want the background filled. So I'll be looking for something that's landscape, and I'm also looking for something that obeys the rule of thirds. So your rule of thirds is effectively illustrated roughly on this photo. This will work. So for this one, what you've got is, imagine you have a grid that divides this into thirds vertically and horizontally. Wherever those lines intersect is where your focal point is for that photo. So this is a really common concept with art, photography. You can Google it and learn more about it. But what I'm looking for is something that obeys the rule of thirds and gives me plenty of room to place text. And I generally want the subject, wherever those cross points are, I want the subject to be down the bottom or over on the right-hand side, because that is the space that I have to work with. So I can have subjects filling this area or kind of filling this quadrant here. So coming back to this site, we'll kind of scroll through, and you can get really fast at this because you kind of know what you're looking for. So I'll have a look through, and all of these, you'll see a lot of these photos have got people that fill the photo, and that just doesn't work. I want something like this, because I've got kids playing, they're jumping, they're using fundamental skill sets. Not quite right from a New Zealand context, but it'll work for this example. So what I'll do is I'll go to download free, and it'll download onto my device. And then you'll also notice down here that it gives you the ability to copy the embedding badge to give that author credit for the work that they've done. So what I want to do here is embed a credit badge. I'll click that link, and it'll give me a little pop-up, and it gives me the HTML that I need to make this button. And I like that button because it's nice and clean. It's not just the text, it's just clean little button that you can add anywhere. So when you click down here, it actually highlights the whole thing for you. So once you've got that highlighted, you'll go to Command Copy, Command C, and then we'll come back to our slide here, and we'll go ahead and fiddle around with that photo, firstly. So we'll go to Media Image, and we'll choose a file, and it'll likely be in my downloads. Here we go. And what you'll notice is that this is a huge photo. Much too big for me to put on a slide. You always want to crop them down to an appropriate width and height. So if you look over here, I'll zoom this in so you can see a little bit better. On the preview screen in the Media Manager, we've got a little link here that shows up when you look at kind of the size of that image. So this image is 5,000 pixels by 3,461. Way too big for what we need it for. So we actually want to crop that down so that it fits within our slide. So if you click that, you actually end up in an editing area. Fun fact. And there we go. What I want to do is resize it first. So I'll go to resize, and then what you're trying to get it to fit in is 950 by 600. I'm pretty sure. No, 900 by 650. Yeah, lost it for a second there. So what I'll do is fiddle around with the ratio and figure out which one is going to be the biggest one that I need to fill, and then I crop the rest. So let's try 950 first, and you'll see that's actually quite close. So 950, and then my height is already bigger than what I need it to be. So I'm going to say, yep, that is the width that I want. And then I will go to crop, and then you just change that to 600. And then what you end up with is a crop photo already in place. You click upload, you'll have that image uploaded at the measurement that you want. And then when you double click on it, you'll see that it fits nicely in place. So right now it's on top of everything that I have, and I actually want it to be in the back. So I'll go to layout, layer, send to back. And now we have this really nice image kind of sitting in the background. So from here, I find sometimes with these images in the background, it's actually difficult to go back and edit stuff that's on top of it because you accidentally will grab that image. So sometimes I'll make it into a master page to set it as a background that I can use later on as well. So if you go to master page, make master, you'll notice that that slide has jumped from being in position 3 to being called master 1. And what I need to do from here is actually grab these two elements and copy them and put them on a slide and then reapply the background. So we'll go to we'll go to add, and then you go to copy with those elements selected, page, new slide. You'll apply master 1 using this drop down here, and then we will paste those elements in place and then come back and remove them from the master slide. So now what I have are cells that I can move independently without worrying about dragging the background around. So the other thing I'll do is look at how can I make that text work a little bit better on this particular image. So you've got two different approaches. You can put it on kind of like a shaped background, or you can put what's called a mask on top of the image. For this example, I think I just want to put a mask on it. So to do that, you'll go to your master slide, you will go to add, shape, and then pick a rectangle. And then you add that up in the top left and then drag it so that it fills the whole thing. Go to cell style, you'll remove the border, like such. And then with the fill, you decide if you want to have a whitewash or a dark wash on it. So dark wash will make it darker, whitewash will make it lighter. I have dark text for this particular skin, so I'm going to go with the whitewash. And then you want to adjust the opacity of that fill. So I usually will go with something like an 80% first and just see kind of what that looks like. And so what you'll see is I now have my whitewash, so I'll come back and look at this slide and kind of adjust it from there. I may want some more color on it, so I can come back to the master slide, and this is where you can get really fiddly with whatever you're doing, and just continue dropping that opacity down until you find kind of the balance that you're looking for. Any questions about any of that? I know I've gone really quickly, but we are recording all this, so if you really want to listen to me again for 30 minutes, you can. Any questions about any of that? Cool. Right, so what we now have is what are our motor skills, why are they important, and then the next things are going to be how is this linked into squash skills development, and then the 3 different groups of skills. So for something like this, you're going to be doing pretty much the same thing again. These two things could actually sit on the same slide. It just depends on how you want to illustrate them. If you wanted to have your 3 groups of skills listed individually, you could have a slide for locomotion, a slide for body management, a slide for manipulative, and then icons or images that kind of depict each of those examples. You could look at replacing this whole thing with a video. You could put them both on the same slide and just leave them as text. That's an option as well. So there are a lot of different ways that you could tackle this one. If it was me, honestly, my suggestion would be to replace this with a video, because nobody reads, like if you made that into a slide and then bullet pointed all those things, nobody reads that, they're not going to remember it. The other thing is it really important for people to understand the difference of those things as well? So thinking about your course and what you need people to understand, are you going to ask them about what's the difference between these? If you're not, then you can just say, here are some examples of what we have, and not worry so much about them understanding the differences between them. It goes back to just thinking about what your learning objectives are for that particular course. So that tends to be my next port of call for kind of how you go about designing the rest of your content. You always want to point back to whatever your goals are. So when you're designing a course from the ground up, you actually go through a process of saying, okay, when someone graduates from this, what should they be able to do? And that's how you determine what your course objectives are. And once you have that, you just point everything back in those directions. Yes, so that's roughly how I would approach something like this. Does anyone have any questions about any of that waterfall information I just threw at you? Nada? Awesome. Okay. Richie, you good?
Yeah, I just wondered what should be the focus for an author in terms of you've taken one slide and now generated 4 slides from it.
Yeah.
Is that good instructional design, or is that should they be increasing the slide numbers or decreasing, or
So,
is it about the content?
That's a very good question. It is very much about the content, ultimately. And if you can go through at the very beginning of this process and read through everything and get rid of as much as you can, then what you have is something that's already on the way to being really well designed. The thing that people struggle with, I find, is that they end up with these modules that are really, really long, but a lot of that information may not be necessary for their end user. And that's really your first port of call with any kind of instructional design approach, is really hammer out the content. And that's where a lot of people miss it, because they're like, oh, well, this PowerPoint someone made 10 years ago, we'll just use this. But you have to be really careful with that, because that information may not be necessary for the people that you're pitching it at. And really, if you have 4 slides, but they're all designed this way, I would find reading 4 slides of that way more interesting than reading 1 of that. So it's a balance. Like, you don't want to have so much stuff that they're clicking through slide after slide after slide. But if you have that much information and it's necessary, then you look at breaking them into different modules so that you can have a better micro-learning approach. It's all about how you structure it after that. But it really, the most important part of that whole process is reading it, understanding it, culling what you can, and making sure that anything you add is adding value, not on the way to being really well designed. The thing that people struggle with, I find, is that they end up with these modules that are really, really long, but a lot of that information may not be necessary for their end user. And that's really your first port of call with any kind of instructional design approach, is really hammer out the content. And that's where a lot of people miss it, because they're like, oh, well, this PowerPoint someone made 10 years ago, we'll just use this. But you have to be really careful with that, because that information may not be necessary for the people that you're pitching it at. And really, if you have 4 slides, but they're all designed this way, I would find reading 4 slides of that way more interesting than reading 1 of that. So it's a balance. Like, you don't want to have so much stuff that they're clicking through slide after slide after slide. But if you have that much information and it's necessary, then you look at breaking them into different modules so that you can have a better micro-learning approach. It's all about how you structure it after that. But it's really the most important part of that whole process is reading it, understanding it, culling what you can, and making sure that anything you add is adding value, not just mess or distraction. Mess is probably not the right word. Sometimes it's not very messy, it's just distracting. Good question. Gold star. Anything else? All right. Sweet as. Well, thank you all very much for logging on. I most appreciate your attendance. And Daniel, just so you know, I'll leave this here on your site. It's just in test module, so you can use that from button on page and then from, if you want to grab either of those slides for your own use. So yeah. Other than that, if you have questions after the fact, totally fine. Get in touch with your Bracken representative, and we will switch it up. Wonderful. Cool. Thanks very much, guys. Talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks so much. Thanks. See you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.